When you're a G6 program, you sustain success by following your template and blueprint, not the coach. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode on the College Underdogs YouTube channel. I'm your host, Trey Smith. We are the show that goes beyond the blue bloods. And I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone that has subscribed up to this point. I said it on last week's episode that last week's video might just be the video that gets our channel over 5,000 subscribers. And it was, as you can see. Now let's get to 6,000, 10,000, 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, whatever, however far we can take it. If you're a fan of an underdog team in college football, this is the channel for you. We are the show that goes beyond the blue blood. So I'm going to ask you right now, before we get into today's discussion, if you will just like this video, hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, and then leave a comment at the end. I always love to know your thoughts. We always get some really good discussion going on this channel. You can go look at prior videos, a lot of good discussion, a lot of good takes, a lot of good input that people bring to this conversation. And ultimately, that's what this is. It's a college underdog community discussing college football and talking about some of the things that maybe don't get as much coverage at the national level. Well, if you don't already know, Sunday was a crazy day in the coaching carousel world, particularly in the American Conference. I got to tell you, I'm not surprised because all the coaches that are gone or that are going to other jobs have been linked to other jobs for quite some time now. But I think that it speaks to the quality of the league and the quality of the programs when you're seeing multiple coaches being poached by SEC programs. And then one Big 12 program, but that particular coach, Eric Morris, had an opportunity to go SEC had he wanted to. But in case you weren't already aware, we've got Ryan Silverfield, and to me, which was the shocker of the day. Memphis's former head coach is headed to Arkansas. I've given my thoughts on that on 2 prior videos. So if you're watching this video and you'd like to know what those are, you can go back and look last week and a couple weeks ago right here on the Underdogs channel. I talk about Memphis and I talk about how Ryan Silverfield's fit at Arkansas might be. John Sumrall from Tulane is headed to Florida. Golesh, who we thought was going to Arkansas, it was prematurely reported that he had agreed to go to Arkansas, is actually going to Auburn. We know that Eric Morris is going to Oklahoma State. He was the first domino to fall out of all of these. And then JMU, currently, Bob Chesney is still the head coach there, but there was a report I saw with Football Scoop, I saw with actually a Penn State media outlet, that he is sort of risen to being the leading candidate for UCLA. And so the first thing I want to say before I start talking about some candidates to keep an eye on or names to know in this coaching search, I think things are going to move pretty quickly, particularly with the portal, particularly with signing day. I think some things are going to move quickly. Also, knowing that a lot of these coaches were linked to other jobs for some time now. So a good athletic director is going to have that short list of names to call to have on ready in the event they lose their coach. In fact, I think that's a good practice for any G5 AD, particularly ones that are at a really good program, knowing that, okay, it's only a matter of time before our coach gets poached, so I got to make sure I have the next guy lined up. But something that I had put out on Twitter/X over the Thanksgiving holiday that generated some good discussion, I felt like, was talking about how when you're a G6 program, you sustain success by following your template and blueprint, not the coach. In other words, JMU, we saw, went from Signetti to Chesney and didn't skip a beat. Tulane went from Fritz to Sumrall, didn't skip a beat. And then I'd even referenced on there in that same tweet that we saw another program that ditched their blueprint in order to stay in-house. And it shows, is what I said. And I was obviously referring to Memphis. I didn't mean it as a shot at Memphis, but I think when you see the template that was really set out by Fuente and then carried on and taken to new levels with Norvell, they sort of pivoted from that, hired this O-line coach who was in-house, I guess thinking he would be more of a CEO type guy. They gave him every possible resource and he still couldn't get it done. And Arkansas just gave Memphis, an early Christmas present in hiring him. And I think when you look at the fan base and even the Memphis media reaction, it would support that sentiment. But the bottom line is losing your coach as a successful G6 program does not have to be the end of the world. Just stick to the template that's proven to be successful. Now, am I saying that that's bulletproof? No. But what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be an all-out total restart, rebuild, back to square one. Just go, okay, what works for this program? And let's go find a coach who fits that mold and plug them in. Don't try to pivot away from what's proven to work. Don't do it in the name of, trying to keep more continuity, so we're going to keep it in-house. No, just stick to the template and the blueprint of what's proven to be successful at your program. And I believe things will work out just fine. So what this episode, this first part at least, is I'm going to go through each of these openings and talk about a couple of coaches that I think fit the mold for what would be successful at that particular school. I'm inviting your feedback. I also know we have people on this channel that follow some of these different programs and you're in the know. You're plugged in with different people and sources. I'd love to hear what you're hearing. Those of you that might be located and be boots on ground in these areas. What are you hearing about your particular school? Who are they targeting and who do you want? Who would be your best case scenario? If you're a Memphis fan, if you're a South Florida USF fan, if you're a Tulane fan, if you're a UNT fan, and even if you're a JMU fan. I know JMU, your best case scenario is keeping your coach, but in the event he does go to UCLA or in the event he does go to Penn State, who are your best case scenarios and worst case scenarios? And then how do you feel about the ones that I'm about to suggest? So without further ado, let's talk about Memphis. And yeah, Memphis, I did say it on Twitter. I said, meanwhile, one program ditched the blueprint that got them a New Year's Six bid to keep it in-house, and it shows. And I didn't mean it as a dig, but it shouldn't matter now because you have a blank canvas in front of you now. You have an opportunity right now to go hire a guy that fits in the mold that works and hopefully get yourself into the CFP. All right, so the first one is a name that almost immediately started popping up the second that the news of Silverfield leaving popped up, and that is Coach Jerry Mack, who's currently at Kennesaw State. He took over this year, took over a program that was 2-10 in their first year at the FBS level, and now this year is 9-3, getting ready to play for a Conference USA championship. I think if you look at his overall history, he is a winner. He's been a head coach at the FCS level at North Carolina Central. His overall head coaching record is 40-18. He's from Memphis. He was an assistant at Memphis. Now, the year he was an assistant at Memphis was not, it was, I think, the year before Fuente got there. So they were 2-10, but he's a Memphis guy. And if that's important to the Memphis brass, then that's probably going to bode well for Coach Mack to get that job. But he doesn't. Here's the thing about him that doesn't really fit the mold of the two guys who really took Memphis to new heights, talking about Fuente and Norvell, is he doesn't have a real long history as a play caller. He was the OC at Rice for a few years, but most of his career was as a positions coach. I'm not necessarily saying I hold that against him and that would keep him from being successful at Memphis. I'm just saying that doesn't quite fit the blueprint that I think has been demonstrated as what can be most successful at Memphis. And then he was a running backs coach at Tennessee with the Volunteers and running backs coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars last year before taking over Kennesaw State. But you can't take away that the guy's a winner. And he flipped a 2-10 team into a 9-3 team overnight and potential conference championship. They'll play. In fact, they're going to get a rematch against Jacksonville State. That was one of their 3 losses. The other loss was a 1-point loss to Wake Forest, and then they got smacked by Indiana. But pretty much everybody's gotten smacked by Indiana this year. So again, that's number one. Number two for me, for Memphis, and I'm going to try and keep it at 2 coaches per school just for time's sake. And some of these coaches that I named for one school, I might mention again for another school because I think some of them would be good fits at more than just one of these schools. So these are just names to know. But the second one on my list for Memphis, who I absolutely think fits the Mike Norvell, Justin Fuente mold, is Garrett Riley, the current offensive coordinator at Clemson. Now, there is another job specifically that I think a couple of these other jobs I think he could be a great fit for as well. But he is a Power 4 OC, was a Broyles Award winner in 2022 during the TCU run, goes to Clemson, coaches in 2 conference championship games, and then obviously Clemson has had a very down year this year. But here's my thing with that. I don't hold an offensive coordinator accountable for a head coach's inability to adapt to the new era of college football. What do I mean? Dabo Swinney is obvious. I mean, he's gone on record numerous times and expressed his disdain for things like NIL, for things like the transfer portal, and his just absolute refusal to adapt to the ever-changing landscape of college football. I don't hold Garrett Riley accountable for that, and I think that has a lot to do with some of the dip that the Clemson football program has taken. However, I think him as a play caller, I think he would come in, he would call his own plays. He reminds me a lot of Norvell in terms of his makeup and maybe not necessarily his system, but kind of his system. I'm not saying they run the same thing. He's more from his brother's kind of spread, air raid, hybrid theme. I think Norvell was more of a spread, pro style type scheme. Both were effective, but that's who I think could be a great fit at Memphis that really fits that mold in terms of what's proven to be successful at Memphis. And then I know I said I was going to try to keep it at 2 schools, but the third name I got to throw out here is Billy Napier. And let me preface this, Sunbelt Billy Napier. If Sunbelt Billy Napier, who won, how many games at Louisiana? Went 40-12 at Louisiana. If that Billy Napier can show up at Memphis, you might have a recipe for success. But again, he's also not in that same like play caller guru like a Mike Norvell or Fuente was at TCU before coming to Memphis. But anyways, that's another thing with Garrett Riley. Hey, the last guy you hired who was an offensive coordinator at TCU panned out pretty well, and Garrett Riley was too. But Billy Napier, anyways, Memphis fans, if you're watching, let me know who's your top candidate, who's your best case scenario, who's your worst case. All right, let's move on to USF, the Bulls. I think this one's pretty obvious. Willie Simmons, he is currently the head coach at FIU. Just won 7 games, and I think FIU was coming off of, what were they, 4-8? I think back-to-back 4-8 seasons. I think if FIU wins their bowl game and goes 8-5, this would be the first time since Butch Davis's first 2 seasons that the program had won 8 games. And, but Coach Simmons made a strong name for himself, strong reputation for himself, particularly in the state of Florida when he was at FAMU. And trying to pull his page back up. But he made a name for himself when he was coaching at FAMU. Prior to that, he was at Prairie View A&M. So overall record, 73-29. His last season at Florida A&M, FAMU, before going to Duke as a positions coach. They were 12-1, won the Celebration Bowl. And in fact, that season, that one loss was to USF. That's what I was about to say. I don't want to say it without looking, but yeah, they lost to USF. So they were 12-1, 9-2, 9-3 prior to that. Back-to-back 9 wins, then a 12-win season. Over a decade of head coaching experience. I think he would be a home run for USF. But if you talk about USF and we get to that blueprint, that template, Golesh obviously was an offensive play caller. But I think if you look at the history of USF, they were most successful when they had a defensive-minded head coach. And one of the guys that I'm keeping an eye on, and I'm going to mention him for another job as well, is Kane Womack. Now, I know he was linked to the Arkansas job. He obviously didn't get it. And, when you're the defensive coordinator at Bama, you're hoping to land probably an SEC head coaching job as your next opportunity, or at least a Power 4 opportunity. But if you're Kane Womack, if there's 2 group of 6 jobs that are going to get your attention, it's South Florida and it's the other, well, Memphis as well, but I don't know that Memphis is going to go in that direction. But it's USF, and it's the next team that I'm going to talk about that I also think he'd be a great fit for. But Kane Womack, I think, is someone, he's like I said, he's the DC at Alabama, has head coaching experience at South Alabama. Wasn't a great run, but wasn't bad. Did have a 10-win season there. And I think he could be a great fit at USF and really bring back that defensive mentality. In fact, I think their last 10-win season there was with Charlie Strong, who was another defensive mindset. Well, now here I am going on. I'm thinking Willie Taggart was more of an offensive guy, and he had a lot of success. So I guess USF, if you're a fan, what are you looking for? What do you think is the most successful blueprint for your program? Is it a defensive-minded guy, an offensive-minded guy, a CEO guy who hires good staff and just brings in good players? What do you want? I think that Willie Simmons would be a home run. I think Kane Womack would be a home run. And then, of course, I'm going to throw this name out there just because I know he seems to be chomping at the bit. He'd give his left arm to coach football again, and that's John Gruden. And the only reason why I mention him is not because I think he's a serious candidate, but I think if he's going to get back into coaching football, it's going to be at the collegiate level. And if it's going to be at the collegiate level, it's going to have to start at a program that's in a G6 conference. I don't think any of these bigger programs are going to give him a chance. And I know he has deep ties in the Tampa area, obviously there in his time as the Buccaneers coach, winning a Super Bowl. I know he's well connected with the USF program. And look, it's coaching carousel season. Anything is possible, but USF, I've got Willie Simmons as the home run hire, and then I think Kane Womack would also be a great fit. The other school that I'm going to talk about next that I also think Kane Womack would be a great fit at, and that is Tulane. Tulane got the news today that John Sumrall is headed to Florida. I think they were really hoping to keep him. I think that a lot of the national reports prior to Sunday morning all seem to have a little caveat in there that him staying at Tulane is a great possibility. I think that speaks to the level and caliber of program and investment that Tulane has made and that they are. I think Kane Womack could plug right in and continue to carry the torch, just like Sumrall carried the torch from Fritz, and he would carry that from Sumrall. I don't think he would skip a beat there. I think another name that we could see pop up with Tulane is Billy Napier. Obviously, the last time he coached in the state of Louisiana, as I've already said, he had tremendous amounts of success. I think he's another one that if he can get back to that Sun Belt Billy Napier, he could do some really big things at Tulane and continue to make them a perennial conference contender and also CFP contender year in and year out. And then the other name I'm going to throw out here that I think also fits the mold of what shows to be successful at Tulane, which is really having that strong defense and anchored by a strong defense. And that's Sheil Wood, the current defensive coordinator at Texas Tech. He was the Tulane defensive coordinator a couple of years ago in 2023. And then he ended up going to Houston with Coach Fritz. Now he's at Texas Tech. Texas Tech has one of the best defenses in the country. He's a big part of that. I think he could come in at Tulane and do a phenomenal job. I think what Tulane's going to have to decide this go-around is how much of a factor is prior head coaching experience. And if that is a must, then obviously Sheil Wood would be out despite his prior connection to the program. And I think at that point, you might see someone like Kane Womack start to pop up. You might see someone like Billy Napier start to pop up. Someone with prior head coaching experience, prior successful head coaching experience that they bring in and can carry that torch. Obviously, John Sumrall coming from Troy. Willie Fritz had extensive experience at Sam Houston State, and I think some other places prior to that. And so I think that Kane Womack, even though it was only a few years, he's got a good resume of being a head coach, and then obviously now big time experience at a big time program as a coordinator. So let me know, Tulane fans, who's your top Who's your worst case, best case scenario for the Tulane job? All right, let me keep it moving with UNT. Now, I'm going to bring up another candidate that would be at the top of my list for this UNT job. And again, that's Garrett Riley. I think the blueprint that we've seen be successful at UNT really just starts and stops with the Mike Leach coaching tree. Seth Luttrell had success. You bring in Eric Morris. Both of these guys are Mike Leach guys. Morris has taken it to new levels, and I think right now, I think it has to do with a couple of different things. I think it has to do with the level of investment that the program committed to making when they joined the American Conference and the level of resources and exposure that they're getting compared to being in the Conference USA. Those things aren't going away. I think UNT has a phenomenal athletic director, and I think Coach Morris, he fit the mold of what wins football games at UNT, and now he has them primed in a position to potentially make the CFP, be playing for a conference championship on Friday. And so who fits that mold? Garrett Riley fits that mold. The only thing that could be a knock on Garrett Riley with UNT, similar to Tulane, is how much of a premium, how much of a requirement is it to have prior head coaching experience? Obviously, Eric Morris came to UNT from being a coordinator, but prior to being a coordinator, he had very successful head coaching experience at Incarnate Word. And so Will Mosley, the athletic director, put a premium on prior head coaching experience? If he does, the guy that I believe will be at the top of the list. In fact, Dave Campbell's Texas Football put a report out Sunday morning that this guy is at the top of the North Texas head coaching list, coaching search list. And that's excuse me. And that's Neil Brown. Neil Brown is the former head coach at West Virginia. Had a not so good tenure there. Had one good 9-win season. But again, kind of like I've been saying about Napier, if you can get Sunbelt Neil Brown at UNT, that could be a recipe for a lot of success. Because when Neil Brown was at Troy, he went 35-16, conference championship, back-to-back 10-win seasons. One of those was an 11-win season. He also he considers himself a Mike Leach disciple as well. I don't think he ever coached under Mike Leach, but he did play under Mike Leach when Leach was the offensive coordinator at Kentucky with Hal Mumme. Neil Brown was a player and considers him his ultimate influence in terms of coaching. And I think a lot of what he runs schematically, offensively, resembles that air raid offense. Obviously, all these guys, Morris included, they put their own wrinkles on it. But I think one of the things that's similar with Neil Brown and Morris, if we're just talking X's and O's, is that yes, that those air raid concepts are staples in what they want to do offensively. But man, both of those guys run the ball, and their teams usually run the ball really well. And so I think Neil Brown could be an absolute grand slam at UNT. And I think that if he gets that job, he can keep that momentum going, carry that torch, and really potentially turn UNT into a program that's viewed like a Tulane on a national level. Because if you think about Tulane, in 2021, man, these guys went 2-10. And prior to that, they didn't really have this illustrious football history at all. In fact, they were good for 7 wins a season. I think prior to Fritz, they had lost they had multiple 10-loss seasons. And then all of a sudden, they catch fire in 2022. They find a formula, make a run, get the New Year's 6 bid, beat USC, and it's like they just continue to follow that formula. Fritz leaves. They bring in a guy that sticks to that formula. Now, here we are within 5 years. The whole narrative, the whole perception, the investment that's being made into the program has completely shifted from where it was 5 years ago. And the good thing about being a G6 program is like it doesn't take long to flip that narrative. And I really think that if North Texas gets this hire right, they're going to be in position to have that type of impact on their program. And so we could see that same type of narrative, that same type of perception shift with North Texas over these next several years, especially if they land this hire. And I think Neil Brown is a guy that can do it. And then finally, on the coaching, I'll say I'm treading lightly on this one, especially if there's JMU fans watching, because you're going to be like, our coach is still our coach. And you're right. But he is linked pretty heavily to UCLA right now. And I'm just going to throw one name out. If Chesney were to move on, I think a guy that you could bring right in and plug right in and essentially carry the torch for Chesney the way that Chesney carried the torch for Cignetti, and that's Coach Kevin Cahill from Lehigh. The only difference in Cahill from Chesney and Cignetti is that his head coaching background isn't as extensive. But I think the formula that JMU has followed that's proven to be successful is they go find guys that have successful head coaching experience at the FCS or even lower levels than that. And they bring them in, and it started, Cignetti comes in, does his thing. They bring in Chesney from Holy Cross, but he had experience at a couple places prior to Holy Cross. And I think this guy, Kevin Cahill, is of that same mold. He just doesn't have as many years. However, if you look at what he's doing at Lehigh, they were 2-9 his first season. Second season went 9-4, and then currently they're 12-0 with their sights set on an FCS national championship or NCAA Division I national championship. And so they're in the playoffs, I should say. I don't know. I don't follow that level as closely. So I'm not sure if they're how likely they are to win it all. But I know going from 2-9 to 12-0 in a playoff and being in the playoff hunt by year 3, I think that's a guy that you could bring into JMU, plug in, and he could just keep the momentum flowing. But as I said at the top, let me know your thoughts. If you're a fan of one of these programs I just discussed, who is your best case and worst case scenario? Even if you're not a fan, if you're just a football fan in general and you're following this coaching carousel, who do you think will be the best fit at these different programs? And then finally, I'll just say this real quick. Obviously, I got to mention the CFP race. SMU getting upset by Cal solidified Duke's place in the ACC championship. The dream is still alive, folks, to potentially get 2 G6 teams into the CFP. But that's going to require Duke to beat Virginia. Now, will the committee still put Duke in, even with 5 losses, over a 1-loss JMU, or over a 1-loss or 2-loss Tulane, 1-loss UNT? I sure hope not, but I would think that if Duke wins the ACC championship, the 4th and 5th highest ranked conference champions would be the American Conference and would be the Sun Belt Conference. As long as JMU wins, and then, of course, whoever wins between UNT and Tulane. And the last question I'm going to ask before I sign off is, do you think the committee will use these coaching changes against these programs? For example, if it's announced that Chesney's going to UCLA prior to that final committee meeting, the rankings release, would they put a 5-loss team in over a 1-loss JMU because JMU's coach is leaving? Will they do that to UNT or Tulane knowing the coaches are leaving? Now, it's pretty established, it's set, that Eric Morris is going to coach this team all the way through. I have not seen the latest on Sumrall. It might be out there already. It might come out now. I don't know. I know he's coaching the conference championship, to my knowledge. I don't know what his future looks like from there if they were to make the CFP. But will that be used against these teams? What do you think? That's it for me today. Trey Smith, College Underdogs.